I think we'll get underway. So good morning, everybody, and welcome to the first of our SmartLeader Webinar Series, focusing today on the topic of psychological safety. It's fantastic to see so many people joining us today online. We've got over 200 participants from a wide range of sectors across business and community networks, and a special welcome and thank you to those online from Australia and across the UK. This is the first in a series of webinars that we have planned over the next few months, where we plan to discuss a variety of topics that influence employee and team engagement, leadership and organisational development, developing our people and teams, and looking at new and innovative ways to create empowering and productive organisational cultures. My name is Nick Shepherd. I've just recently joined the SmartLeader team as CE, and it is my absolute privilege to be the panel host for today's session. We have an incredible panel today of highly experienced leadership and organisational development senior practitioners and leaders who are going to share their thoughts and reflections on the topic. And then at the end, an opportunity for some Q&A. And I'd just like to say thank you to those who have already sent through some questions that we've got logged. And if we've got time towards the end of the webinar, we're certainly very keen to go through those with you. So I'd like to now introduce our expert panel, starting with Dr. Jeff Lorigan. Many of you will know Jeff. Jeff is the founder and director of the Institute for Strategic Leadership, ISL, and SmartLeader, an incredibly experienced leader in the fields of leadership development, people and organisational development, business innovation, and building high-performing teams. A very successful business person and leader in his own right, and a mentor to many of us. Good morning, Jeff. Nice to see you.
Good morning. Thanks, Nick, for that very nice introduction. Thank you.
Very welcome. I'd now like to introduce Kim Lincoln, founder of the Field Coaching and Development Organisation, a vastly experienced senior executive leadership coach, a founding leader in cognitive behavioural safety, and currently an organisational psychologist registrar. Morning, Kim. Nice to see you.
Good morning, Nick. Thank you.
And finally, Angela Neely. Angela, with over 30 years experience in senior HR and organisational development roles in organisations from 10 to 100 to over 1,000 people in that time. Some massive companies, Metro Water, Vodafone, Warehouse Group, Etco. Fabulous to see you, Angela. And Angela has just joined us at SmartLeader as our new organisational development lead. So good morning, Angela.
Thank you, Nick. Yes, good morning, everyone.
So just briefly to go through the aims of the webinar today and what we're hoping you'll be able to take away with you at the end of the 60 minutes. What we'd like to start by doing is discussing and defining psychological safety and psychosocial safety and the importance it plays in employee team engagement and building high-performing cultures. We're going to have a look at what are the opportunities for us if we get this right, but then also what are the risks if we get this wrong. And then a great part of the webinar, I believe, for you will be the tips and the enablers and the takeaways, the actions that you'll be able to take from our expert panel to help you better understand this important topic and how to positively influence the psychological safety within your respective teams and organisations that you lead. At the end, like I said, an opportunity for some Q&A, so please send those through. Bianca's collating those, and we'll get to as many of those towards the end of the webinar as we possibly can. So hopefully that gives you an overview. So let's dive in. And I'd like to start by asking Kim if she could help sort of set the scene for us in explaining psychological safety and psychosocial safety and how we can focus on this within our organisations. Kim.
Good. Thank you, Nick. And hello, everyone. Delighted to be here with you all and speaking to this topic, which I am quite passionate about. And I think it's very worthy of our time and our reflections. So I thought before we talk about psychological safety, I wanted to distinguish that from psychosocial safety. Psychosocial safety, I've got to say it right first, is about the work-related factors that can actually have a negative impact on our mental health and well-being. And the easiest way to define this is through a jobs demand and resource model. So basically it says that in the workplace, there are so many demands on us. So we've got to perform, we've got to output, we've got KPIs, we've got so many demands, and we've also got resources available to us. So role clarity, supervisor support, group support, change consultation. And so psychosocial safety is regarding when the demands, if the demands actually outweigh the resources, there can be a risk of harm for us, for our mental well-being in the workplace. So basically, in Australia, we spend about $11 billion per year on mental health issues within the workplace. So depression, anxiety, etc., which leads to absenteeism, which leads to turnover. And basically, it means that we've really got to look at psychosocial safety. And when we talk about the legislation, what we're really referring to is the psychosocial safety legislation within workplaces. Now, where does psychological safety fit into all of that? Well, psychological safety is actually one of those resources. So it fits under the supervisor and the group support, which basically means the leadership support and the team support that we have. So what is psychological safety? That is when we feel free, safe to express ourselves within the workplace without fear of punishment or discrimination. So it's the perceived interpersonal safety. It's the behaviours that we perceive are either safe or unsafe. And it is the sense of us feeling like we belong in the workplace, that we are valued, that we are respected in the workplace. It also is our ability or our sense of our freedom to speak up about concerns that we have, about questions that we have, ideas, and also about our failings. And in terms of us actually being able to share from and learn from failings is determined by the psychological safety. So we probably know a lot about Amy Edmondson. She's one of the well-known people in this field, although there have been many contributors toward the research. And this Amy Edmondson actually started off looking at the medical industry, where there were failures in diagnoses or dose mistakes and not speaking up, and how those psychological risks actually led to a lot of errors and also became a topic of life or death. So it started there, but we can take that into every organisation. What are the psychological risks in every organisation, the things that we need to be aware of? And Amy Edmondson says, no one gets up in the morning wanting to go to work and look ignorant, incompetent, intrusive, or negative, but just by way of our interactions at work and the nature of our work, we're all human. So what happens is when we make mistakes, we look around. How are these things received? How are we treated? What happens when we fail, when we don't know, or when we don't agree? So psychological safety is fundamental for our performance in the workplace, for how we perform, how engaged we are. It's fundamental to our innovation, to our working well and our teaming well. So that's what psychological safety is and how it fits into the psychosocial umbrella that we talk about. I think it's also important to note what it is not. So psychological safety is not just about being nice. In fact, the research shows that we've got to lean into some hard things and into some vulnerability, and we've got to give up some likability actually to lead psychological safety in the workplace. It's not a personality thing. It's not just that some people are great at it and some aren't. We can all develop this ability to contribute to psychological safety. It's not just another term for trust. Trust feeds into it, but there's a much broader topic of belonging and inclusion, and also being able to fail together. And it's not just about lowering performance. I think there's a lot of people out there that are concerned about, look, if we make people too safe, then they're just going to get comfortable and they're not going to do anything. And in fact, the research shows that that's not true. The more psychological safety we have, the better we perform, the more that we contribute and the more that we innovate together. So Nick, that's my introduction to the topic, and I'll hand back to you and for the rest of the panel. Yeah.
That's fantastic, Kim. Thank you. That's an incredible scene setter, and it leads nicely into a segue around the fundamentals, Jeff, which Kim talked about, you know, fundamentals in terms of roles of governance and directors, directorship, executive leadership. Jeff, from your experience and understanding, what are your thoughts on the subject in relation to these areas?
Well, before I respond to that, I just want to say that I had a look through the list of people who registered to come, and I see we've got some very senior people at board level, you know, Natalie Jane McDonald up in London, Kathy Townsend in Australia, and others here in New Zealand as well. So really, this whole topic needs to be addressed not just at an HROD learning and development level, but certainly at a board and governance level, and also at a CEO level as well. I mean, we've all seen in the newspapers over recent years how companies that had a great brand, companies that we trusted in, you know, legal firms, you know, government agencies, and so on, and even you know, Peter Jackson's business in the multimedia area. Companies that have done awesome things being held to account, and you know, you must be horrified if you're a director or a CEO, or even if you work in those places, to see your company in the newspaper. So you know, it's definitely a topic of great interest and concern and challenge for boards of directors. We've seen the legislation in New Zealand, you know, work safe practices and so on, touching on psychological safety. I've always seen this topic really through the eyes of culture, you know, having a healthy culture. That's it in a simple term. You know, I'm a simple guy. Culture, you want a healthy culture, one that empowers people. And you don't want to have, we've been monitoring culture at a team level now over quite a few years. And it's interesting, you know, talk about a company culture, but culture varies throughout the whole company, team by team. And then when you look within a team, you know, you might get half the team that says this is a high performance culture. And then you might have one or two team members who in the same team say they think it's a culture of fear. You know, how can it be in that one team? And the real challenge is that people mask. No one would have rocked into a team meeting and say, I think there's a culture of fear, but when they've got an anonymous pulse that goes out, you know, it shows up. So that leads down to a whole lot of discussion really about how come some people see it as fear, some see it as high performance, and so on and so forth. But at a governance level, I think, you know, the big change is the legislation's changing. So it's not only an important topic in terms of productivity for a business, because productivity is hugely impacted. Staff turnover, you know, employment brand, all of these things are hugely impacted by the culture. And especially in a time that we're in at the moment, you know, we're all competing for talent, and we don't want to lose talent. We want to gain talent from other places. So having a healthy culture is what you want. So boards of directors need to be thinking about this, but they need evidence-based, because, you know, none of us know how our blood pressure is until we put a thing around your arm, or what your blood sugar's like, or anything else. You have no idea how that's changing by the minute based on emotions and so on. And it's the same with culture. It can change very quickly, and especially during times of uncertainty, which raises anxiety levels and stress. So at this particular time, people can perceive these aspects of bullying, harassment, toxicity, and definitely they will fall under psychological risk. Pilots, and we have pilot lights on our pulse that we monitor these things. So the board should be seeing the overall team by team and all of organisation analytics at a whole of organisation level for sure. Otherwise, they're derelict in terms of not being aware of what's going on. Second actor in the whole game is the CEO. The CEO needs to take responsibility for the culture of the organisation and to ensure that that the leadership and followership is such that that you can have and assure some form of safety. So those are some of the aspects around governance and CEO. HR and OD people operationalize all of this. They provide the tools, they provide the training, they provide expert guidance, they provide data analytics that needs to go to the CEO and the board. So those are important things.
Yep.
But I guess at the heart of all of this is leadership. And without, leadership is one important aspect for sure, but followership is probably just as big, if not bigger. Because without good followers, leadership is actually mission impossible, And so this raises the whole issue of how, we'll talk about it, tips later, how do you go about all of this stuff. But, followers come along now and they come from diverse backgrounds and different ethnicities. So, if you come from some of the Asian cultures, if you come from India and Sri Lanka, for instance, and we have quite a number of wonderful, talented people in our Leader Lab from Sri Lanka and India, they come from a totally different ethnic background, where there's a real hierarchy. As one of our team members said, if the CEO walked in the room and you didn't stand up, you would be certainly told off later and you'd be in big trouble. So there's a much different power distance sort of situation taking place, and people don't open up. They don't open up about their feelings and expressions, and what the boss says is typically right. Now, in a New Zealand, UK, Australian context, in the Western context, it's much more egalitarian. So, there are all these different issues. And I guess in all of us, we grew up under different parents and we grew up in our development phase, had different experience. And we've all built this unconscious bias, which we project onto leaders. So I want to say a word on behalf of leaders. It's a tough gig, particularly right now where, there's the boundaries between work and home has been, disintegrated.
Yeah. People
are working from home. People can be triggered at home, in their home situation. And, there's a spillover effect, into the work situation. There always was, but now with people working from home and those boundaries being broken, that's much more blurred and much more problematic. So look, that's a bag of things, but to frame up, if you like, psychological safety in a practical context, it's about leadership, it's about followership, it's about giving people a sense of belonging, and it's about communication. Because what I'd like to say is, I've been around for a little while now, and even in the best families, there is some disagreement takes place amongst siblings, between siblings and parents. There's some standoffs from time to time, even in the very best families. And on the weekend, I caught up, for instance, with a young man who's a medical doctor, and his mum and dad down in Dunedin are very seriously ill. One's got dementia and the other one's got Parkinson's. And here's this young doctor, 26, trying to deal with it. And he's saying to me about his brothers that are highly talented, one in Australia, one in Dunedin, him in Auckland, and how they have big disagreements because of communications and the likes. Now, the reason I tell this little story is, if it happens in the best of families, just imagine how it's going to happen in the best of teams as well. And the best thing you can do is have regular communications and have a process for those communications. So there's a little bit of an introduction from me and an overview. Yeah. And I hope that helps to contextualize, if you like, psychological safety in the context of culture, engagement, and yeah, those sorts of elements.
Yeah, that's incredibly insightful, Jeff, and thank you. And that importance of the cascading, from board directors through that CEO, executive leadership, all the way down and then back through is so important. And look, Angela, when you think about it, the risks for leaders and organizations if they don't get this right, what do they look like? Because it's very real.
Yeah, kia ora, Nick. Thank you. It is absolutely real. Look, just to put some statistics into the mix here, Gallup conducted a survey where organizations that had a high evidence of psychological safety, they found some fascinating results, and that is that organizations with strong psychological safety had 27% less turnover, 40% less incidents of in the health and safety space, and 12% increase in productivity. So they suggested that it really did make a financial priority to make it important in organizations. June 21, Forbes magazine published an article by Dr. Misha Ann Martin, where she was researching into psychological safety and in specifically mental health and buoyancy in a hybrid work environment. So at that time, in that situation, only 26% of people said that they felt safe in the workplace. 61% said they had elevated stress, and 32% said they felt lonely. So stress was on the increase, well-being on the decrease, turnover was up, burnout was up, depression was up from her findings. Gosh. So, of course, the impact on organizational performance was there. It just can't be as positive an environment as when we make it a priority. So what we're going to do now is just take a moment, it will be just a moment, to put up some reflection questions for you. And I want you to just have a wee think whether you jot this down, whether you do it on a strict scale of 1 to 7, but just reflect for a moment on where your organization currently is sitting in terms of psychological safety. So where would you see it? Is it more to the one end, which is it really isn't even on the radar? Possibly we actually are not on the radar, where there are a lot of inhibitors. And if this is the case, why? So then the second question, how influential are each of you in leading psychological safety in your team and in your companies, in your businesses? And why is that? If you think that there's room for being more influential, what do you need to do to become more influential? So is it a development thing? Is it a speak up piece? Is it a concern for your own well-being if you do speak up, and what might happen? What is causing you? What enables you to support it? What inhibits you to supporting it? And then the last piece that is useful to reflect on in this situation is, what do you need to be providing others in helping them support and create a psychologically safe work environment? So that's really, Nick, the things that I wanted to just pose as concepts at this moment in time. We really are wanting to ensure that we do have better collaboration across the teams, that we have an enhanced employee engagement overall, that we have an inclusive culture, and that we ultimately have increased team performance and organizational performance as a result.
Fantastic. So incredible statistics there, Angela. When you hear them in their very raw format, it certainly lifts the importance and the relevance of this work. So Look, thank you for that, Kim. So what is the opportunity here for us? How can we enhance psychological safety within our teams and within our organizations? What are you seeing as a practitioner in this field?
I think when reflecting on, what's in it for us to actually do this, there was one word that just kept coming up for me, which is probably not the most logical one from the get-go, but I was thinking about the opportunity to really simplify within the workplace. And what do I mean by that? I think we are doing so many things on a day-to-day basis with the best of intentions. We are working at increasing, performance. We're working at getting people more engaged. We're working on diversity and inclusion, movements within the organization. We're trying to get people back to work. We're working on well-being, creativity and innovation. We're doing all of this stuff. But I think we might be missing the foundational block, which is actually to simplify and come back to working just on psychological safety. What would happen if we just focused on that within our organizations and like with a radical commitment to it and a real dedication to it? What would happen? Would we see a change as, the things that we're putting so much energy into, maybe they're the byproduct of really simplifying and coming back to that. I also thought that human beings are really craving a few things within the workplace that psychological safety really takes care of. The first one I see people craving is connection. That there's been a lot of people that have relegated their human connection to going home and being connected at home because it's all just too hard at work. And there are people at work that I don't feel safe around because we have not cultivated these environments of this safety and connection. So if you talk to people and say, when was the best time in your career, they would probably tell you about a time where they had psychological safety, they were connected to people, and they were doing their best work. And I think we forget that, the World Health Organization, when they talk about, what is well-being actually, what is mental health, part of that is realizing our potential. And that brings me to the next one, which is growth. Human beings are really craving growth and development. A lot of leaders who are getting feedback on programs that, that we're running, is that, their people want to grow and develop. There's Amy Edmondson talks about if you've got too much psychological safety without any performance requirements or any high standards, then you just get this comfort zone. If you get too much high standards, high performance, and you get no psychological safety, you get an anxiety zone. But if you've got high psychological safety and you've got high performance standards, you get this learning zone. And I think people are really craving that. They want to actually go to work. And which brings me to the third thing that I think psychological safety takes care of, which is meaning. I've been reading these things about, the great resignation or the quiet quitting. I think the other day I saw something on quiet recruitment. I don't even know what that is, but we're getting all of these terms.
Everything seems to be quiet these days.
It's all quiet. Everyone's been quiet. Maybe that's a problem. But I think it's also that we are redefining work. We're just going, what does this work stuff mean to me anymore? And my mental health is not a good trade for this money, all of this money. It needs to be that we're taking care of each other. We're getting these supportive environments right. And then within that, we find some meaning, that we also know that we're contributing to something. So I think we can simplify and we can meet some of the things that everybody's really screaming for, which is connection, growth, and meaning. There are my thoughts. I'll throw it back.
Yeah, Angela, Jeff, your thoughts on that? Because there's some incredible discussion opportunities in there. What Kim talks about the learning zone. We're talking about meaning. We're talking about connection of purpose. People want to connect to something that's often bigger than themselves. So, what are you seeing? What are some other reflections on this particular aspect of it that you would like to contribute?
I think one of the big things about feeling safe is relates to anxiety. And, we're seeing in the news, for instance, that large companies in the tech sector, for instance, laying off 10,000 staff. And then there's, we have to go through a process of discussion. So people are waiting for 3 months to know whether on board or off board. Those people get very anxious, of course. They don't feel safe. And then they start talking to their friends who are working in other large organizations and going through, radical change right now. So, and then if you've got this so these are just sort of interconnected themes, I guess. You've got Gen Z, and you've got young ones who have actually been doing the university online, through the lockdowns over the last 2 or 3 years. Some of these people, when they come into the workforce, are incredibly anxious. They haven't been socialised. There's been a time where they've missed out on the socialisation process and so on. So we've got these young ones coming in who are very bright and very capable, but they're watching their mobile every 30 seconds, not waiting for a text message or a TikTok or whatever. It's just they're anxious. They're very anxious. They're anxious too about, all of the, global warming and all of the sorts of things that are going on in the world that they're coming into.
That they care about. Sure.
They care about. So it really comes down to the practical level of, how can we provide, an opportunity for these people, for all staff actually in their teams to have discussions about stuff, and when we're going like the clappers, when we're so busy and the leader's so busy, if there's not a process and there's not a routine and there's not an agenda and there's not high trust and goodwill and a little bit of fun Friday and socialization, then, people are going to be a bit scared to open up. But if you scratch the surface, there's a whole lot of anxiety, and a really massive topic that I never imagined is this whole imposter syndrome. I sent a survey around our own Leader Lab, and 4 different times of imposter syndrome. And most of the people said, well, I actually have all 4, but this is the one that's actually the one that's the, most front of mind. Now, I know people all over the world, hugely talented at all levels, not only young people, who have this sense of imposter syndrome. So, all of this adds to the sort of complexity. And what it brings back to is, Kim's right on the mark. It's about what can you do to keep people busy and take their minds off bad stuff? Well, learning and growing and developing and having challenging projects with feedback, encouragement, some training, all of this stuff. This is not a time in our lives, really. We want too much time to think about things because, there's so many things that we could think of and look in the paper at, and it's not good news, unfortunately. So keeping busy. And there's a big debate about, will people ever go back to the workplace? But, maybe we have learned it's good to be home a day a week or something to do some research and so on. But we're social animals. We get a lot of vibes from other people and energy and so on. So how do we make it an energizing environment? These are some of the things that I think we need to be. But only 10% of people in organizations are leaders. 90% are followers. So we'll have to talk about that later. What do we do with the followers? Because you cannot put all this responsibility onto leaders for it to be a safe place, because it's not just the leader and the followers, it's other teams can bully, other teams can block, other teams can do things. And CEOs really need to be keeping an eye on all of the teams, because you could be totally engaged with your team members and feel safe, but you might not feel so good at all about interconnections with other teams or perceptions of the top management.
Sure. Thanks, Jeff. Angela, your thoughts around the opportunities and some of the discussion?
Yes, look, just really wanted to mention that, Kim, to your point around creating that learning zone, it's a little like, the model that came out of the 1980s and still relevant today with Mahali Csikszentmihalyi around the drone zone and that panic zone. And that sitting in the middle is that flow zone where we know we've got the skill, we've got the challenge, just enough. It is a safe place for us to step into our role, and not so safe that it's a drone zone So I think it is that dynamic of that balance.
Between the two. Thank you. Well, thanks everyone. Well, look, that leads nicely into the next part of today's webinar, which is the takeaway for you as the participants in today's session, the tips, the tools, the enablers. And what I'm going to do is ask each of the expert panels if they could provide us with 2 or 3 key tools, snapshots of opportunity that could help in terms of you being able to lead in your organizations and the teams that you're involved in, the psychological safety and the psychosocial safety element that we've discussed today. So maybe, Jeff, if I could start with you, 2 or 3 key kind of tips, takeaways, tools from a governance, directorship, executive leadership perspective. What would be your thoughts?
Well, if I was on the board or a CEO of any organisation, government or commercial or not-for-profit, I would definitely be monitoring on a regular basis. And by regular basis, certainly no longer than 3 monthly, if not more regular.
Sure.
And monitoring the culture, monitoring the psychological risks. There's a whole bunch of tools to do that. We have our one, but of course there's other organisations that provide this. But if you don't have analytics on your board table, just like your financial performance on a quarterly basis, then I'd argue that you're running a big risk at some stage of finding yourself in the newspaper. Somebody's blowing the whistle. I think the other thing is about this followership, about the 90% who aren't leaders. And I think it's about mindsetting them right from the get-go, right from when they first join, all the time, mindsetting them about creating psychological safety for themselves, understanding themselves, understanding how to relate to others, how to click with their boss and one another. If they don't have the tools to do that, if they don't know what's going on in their own iceberg underneath the surface and they're unconscious, they'll be unaware of how their perceptions are projecting the wrong things onto other people.
Yeah.
I think mindsetting people all the time about, and not only mindsetting them, but providing them with a process that they can actually help co-create a safe place at a team level. So I think that's really important. And this leads into training employees around, you can't just throw somebody in who's a good accountant and make them the lead of accountancy. They need to learn about how to be a team builder. They need to learn about the tools and use them safely. And there also needs to be some training around team players as well. This 90% of the organization needs some training as well, not only the leaders, if we're going to create a safe place. Right. I think all of us should be monitoring our mojo ourselves, sitting down and thinking on a Friday night or a Monday morning, probably Monday morning, how's my mojo on a 1 to 7 scale?
Where am I at?
1 to 10 scale. And what is it that's impacting on our mojo? Is it things that are going on at home with my friends and family, with my colleagues and at work? And what help might need, to delegate, delete things and so on. But mojo, this perception of psychological safety, will be moderated significantly by people's mojo. So I think monitoring our own mojo, and then on top of that, as part of this sort of pulsing process, measuring the team mojo on a monthly or quarterly basis. So those are the things that I would suggest are important if it's going to go from a nice, interesting topic into something that's really practical and relevant at an organisation level.
Great, and evidence-based. Angela, thinking about tips, tools from an HR organisational development lens, the world that you've been in and continue to lead in. What's your thoughts around that?
Look, this is something that's been near and dear to my heart for 3 decades plus that I've been a practitioner in organisation in that space. And really it's about how to build a thriving organisation. So it's from an HR and OD lens, it's looking at where we are heading and how we're going to get there, not just where we are now. So that's that organizational development piece. So it's very strategic as well as very operational. One of the messages I would be sending to HR and OD practitioners out there would be, start at the beginning of the inflow, through flow and outflow model of HR and OD. How do we recruit people? When we recruit them, what is in our advertising that shouts that this is important to us? When we are interviewing, how do we ascertain whether somebody is wired in a way that, to Jeff's point around the followership, they're going to understand that irrespective of who they are in the organization, they have a part to play in creating psychological safety in their environment. So that recruitment piece right up front is a part that I would say. And if you do have statistics around, engagement, mojo, those sorts of things, then use them as part of your recruitment brand and your employee brand. So that's one thing. The second thing is that I wanted to touch on is that when it comes to the review or appraisal process, or however that's done, is the model around a fair and just culture. So this is looking at whether an organization, and if there's a review going on, whether we look at a balanced view as to if something's working, why is it working like that? Why is the individual able to deliver in a positive, creative, meaningful way, authentic way in their role? But likewise, and is that because, just before I move on, is that because of good quality leadership development, followership development? Right. But likewise, the other side of the fair and just culture is if something's not going quite to plan, is it the individual themselves that are wholly responsible for that, or is it that the environment hasn't been set up in a way that it is either safe, or the knowledge isn't there, or there's willful disregard for that knowledge and for that aspect of culture, that means that somebody is not showing up. So when a review is happening in any way, shape, or form, are we looking at both ends in a balanced way? And that fair and just culture model is really good for doing that. And then the last piece would be around the diversity, equity, and inclusion space. So in order for people to thrive, everyone has to be able to believe and practice 365 days of the year that whatever they are, whoever they are, whatever their background, whatever sits below their iceberg, has value to the organization.
So true.
If we have Samoan Language Week, are we tick boxing, or are we actually every day of the year is Samoan Language Week? And how do we scoop that in, not just as a tick box exercise, but as a way we go about talking with people that are from multiple different cultures, ethnicities, etc. So it really is, and look, I could go on for hours on this topic alone, on all the aspects across HR. It's near and dear to my heart, but that's just a sample, Nick. Thank you.
Thanks, Angela. Absolutely. And I love that fair and just culture, and then the ability for people to bring their full selves to work, and their experiences and their expertise and their culture and the things that they can bring to help build that. So Kim, let's think about now. Jeff touched on leadership, followership, talked about leading self. So leading yourself, leading teams, leading others. What enablers, kind of tips, tools would you suggest for the participants here that they might be able to take away and consider as something in that space around teams, self, and others?
I think, and I feel like I'm echoing Jeff and Angela here, because they're such great points. I thought about, in terms of the leadership team space, for leaders, the encouragement is to do the real work. What do I mean by that? It's still working with leaders all the time. There's still the imposter syndrome that Jeff came up with. We have our own psychological risks that are happening every day. This is happening in executive teams, can be incredibly unsafe psychologically. And then, you know, all throughout the organization, we have our own experience, whether we're leaders or not, with psychological safety. So the real work means that I actually really come back to my own self-awareness. What is going on for me? When do I actually lose my own sense of self? How am I perception managing every day? Where am I armoring up and not actually being myself? So looking at my own sense of confidence in what I do, and also to really reflect on, am I actually committed to this in my leadership? Am I committed to it? And can I go and do something with that commitment? Because I would say, if you are a leader, and leader is about influence, but as Jeff says, you know, there are some people who have a role and responsibility for others. If I am not interested in psychological safety, if I am not dedicated to doing it, maybe I should not be in a leadership position. And sometimes that's just a reality, but I think this is what the workplace requires. So intentional effort, and that means actually allotting time in your week. Where do you actually have space to do the real work, to actually create this, to facilitate it and perpetuate it? So I was working with a leader the other day, and she's like, Kim, it's just so overwhelming. You know, there is no space. I am totally overloaded. And I think that brings me to the second one, which is really focusing on working intelligently. You know, if in a day or a week in an organization, there is more work than is humanly possible to carry out, then something has to change. You know, we really have to look at how much have we as leaders got on our plates? How much have other people got on their plates? Where is the space for us to actually develop this psychological safety? And what is the impact of our default behaviors, our unconscious behaviors on each other, because we're so overwhelmed and we're so stressed? So we really have to take all of this, the noise out of our working days, and do that with people that we work with, so that we can come together and work intelligently and also fail intelligently. You know, there are so many, psychological safety is about actually the permission to experiment and to fail, but there is so much preventable failure that's happening on a regular basis just because teams and leaders are overloaded, overwhelmed. So we want to actually take out the preventable failure, and we want to fail in things that actually matter, you know, really put our brains to use. And the other thing I would say is, and this is not a new thing, none of this is new, but to develop the ground rules for psychological safety. So with teams, to speak directly to what psychological safety is and what it isn't, to create the ground rules, and also to be tenacious as a leader in holding everybody to account to those ground rules.
That's right.
Yeah. I think we have to give up that likability, and we actually have to go, there is something more important, which is our commitment to this, and to keep coming back to it. So they're my tips.
Incredibly insightful, Kim. Actually, it leads nicely into one of the questions that I've just seen come through a participant. So I'm going to start with this question off the back of your tips and tools. The question is, how do you engage people where psychological safety is used as a phrase to justify passive defensive behaviors? Things like avoidance. So
yeah,
what would be your suggestion in terms of how to engage those types of people in the space?
Yeah, well, I mean, initially, what it says is it's an indicator that there's currently not psychological safety, that people aren't actually speaking to what's going on. So that's an indicator, and that just means there's work to do collectively. And I'll come back to what Jeff said, you know, that no leader, despite your best intentions, no leader can create this for other people. It has to be a joint effort. It has to be something that everybody's committed to. So I would think that the one thing that I think about that is really turn your concerns into questions. if you have concerns about how people might be thinking about psychological safety, misusing psychological safety, just actually turn that into questions and inviting people to actually create solutions. So in the ground rules that we create, there has to be a call to action and a commitment to action. Yeah.
Owned by everybody.
Owned by everybody. Yeah.
Nice. Thank you. Jeff, we've got a question here that's come in. Maybe I could ask this one of you. How do you turn around a company culture of mistrust where challenging conversations with solutions are simply not had?
Look, I think I mentioned before that psychological safety, or if you want to reframe it as culture, is perceived differently by different people within a team, not alone within a whole organization. So at a whole of organization level, there's a lot of nuances, there's a lot of discussions, a lot of talk that goes on, around the water cooler, and gossip, if you like, and perceptions. And I think that's one of the things that really create a toxic culture within an organization. So I think one of the really important things to do is to pulse and measure what the culture is, see where the black spots are, and home in and throw light on it and have discussions. I don't think you're going to be able to, just follow a list of ticking the boxes to change the culture. It's typically around communication, and in the lack of communication, and then people get wrong perceptions. I think it's really important at an organization level, if there's a perception that it's not a good culture or a toxic culture, I think it's just like the human body. Run a test, have a look, find out which parts need to be dealt with and deal with them. Yeah. I'd just like to say, while I have this opportunity to speak for a minute, psychological safety is not just a cognitive thing. It's like the body and like an organization. They are a whole set of systems that work together. So how people feel cognitively is affected to a large extent by stress and anxiety, but by how well they sleep at night, for instance, has a huge impact on depression and all of these things. So physical health is a really big thing as well. So at an organizational level, I guess, there needs to be some leadership discussions about how we can help people to be physically healthy, mentally healthy, but most importantly, I think it is running the CT scanner over the culture and finding the black spots, and then homing in and having good facilitated discussions around this. Yeah, I think that's the key.
Yeah, absolutely, Jeff. And I think too, in my experience, there's a values and a behaviours conversation here to be had too. What are the organisational values and what do they look and feel like? How do we live those? What are the behaviours that are expected around that? And then again, checking those through that evidence-based approach, I think is a very, a very rich way to look at how to unpack some of that mistrust that may be there in an organisation.
When we start having lots of communications and rhetoric and narratives and comms and all this stuff, it doesn't help at all. Really, you have to sit down one-to-one or one with the team, and trust is built up on a very personal level. And I can't see how you can do that, particularly if you have a very bad culture, to do it all online, for example. We need to feel other people's pulse. And so I think, how do you do this? How can you have hybrid situations where you can do things online, but also how can you bring the human beings together and create the safety for them to open up and to share experiences and vulnerability and all these sorts of things?
Yeah.
I think a lot of the psychological risks are around perceptions, and those perceptions really can only be broken by good face-to-face communications, in my view.
Sure. Thank you, Jeff. Look, I think we've got time for one quick question. Angela, I'm going to go to you on this one.
Yeah.
A really interesting question just come through, actually. Organisations that have achieved psychological and psychosocial safety, how do you continue to grow and develop that? What are some opportunities for those organisations that might be there and doing a great job in this space? So we're sort of looking at the other side of the coin here. What's your thoughts around that?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question, because once there's that sense of it and once it's humming, how do you keep it humming? There's a critical mass piece to this, but there's also got to be, so there's almost that subconscious, this is just the way we do things around here, but there's also got to be that intentional keeping it important. I mean, both in Australia, for example, and in New Zealand, there's a legal requirement now to provide a safe working environment that includes psychological safety or well-being. So there are ways we can do this. I mean, leader development, and that's leader development right the way through the organization, is critical to continuing to make it important. And for leaders and HR and OD practitioners to really canvass this sort of leadership that's being rolled out. Is it in support of this? Is it overtly in support of this?
Right.
The other piece I'd say is that in some cases, whether it's somebody new joins an organization, someone leaves, sometimes stuff happens. And you just might find there's a little bit of a moment in time where actually people have gone a little off-piste. And sometimes it's just about turning that around by doing the next smallest step towards building that back up again. And so it doesn't have to be a boiled sea sometimes, particularly if an organization's often humming. It's just that next smallest step rather than what's the great plan that we need to have. And I'm a real one for really understanding that it's a mindset as well. And no matter who you are, where you sit in the organization, you have a responsibility for this. So again, recruiting and bringing in, developing, retaining people that get it is critical. That's how you continue to keep it important.
Fabulous. Thanks, Angela. That brings it nicely to a close, I think. And look, just want to say once again, thank you for everybody who's attended today from right across the world. We hope that this was an insightful and useful session to you all. Certainly covered a lot of views and some tips and tools for you to take away. So I hope they're useful and helpful for you in the journey around psychological safety and psychosocial safety in your team and organizations. I want to say a massive thank you to our expert panel to Jeff, Angela and Kim. Thank you for your insights, experience and expertise. An incredible 60 minutes with you all. Thank you to Bianca, our Smart Leader Customer Experience Lead, the fantastic person who pulled all this together and made sure that everything ran smoothly today. So thank you, Bianca, on behalf of the panel. And just want to let you all know that the webinar today has been recorded. You will receive very shortly a link to that. And please feel free to continue to reach out to any one of us via LinkedIn, email, or via our Smart Leader website, because we'd love to hear from you and partner with you in your journey as you continue to drive the engagement, productivity, and creation of high-performing teams in your place and space. So we look forward to seeing you all at our next webinar in the Smart Leader Webinar Series. We've got imposter syndrome next on the list, and the effect it has on people and teams and organizations. So lock on the date, it's 19th of July, and we'll be in touch very soon with further detail on that. So once again, thank you, everybody. I hope you have a fabulous day. And on behalf of the panel, enjoy the rest of your week. And I hope that has given you some insights, tips, and useful tools in and around psychological safety and psychosocial safety. Thank you, and catch up soon. Kia ora.